Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Sharifa and my poetry name is New Lily. If you're new, please check out the links located in the description box and comment section. And in both locations, you'll find an identical set of links that link to videos that give information about the targeted individual program, technology utilized on targets, tactics utilized, videos telling my story, my experiences, etc. Please check out those links, y'all. Some very important information is shared in those locations, the description box and the comment section. So please check those out, y'all. I took my time and I really put that together for targets because I know what that feels like to get targeted and not know what's going on and, start doing research and digging in all these different places, trying to find out information. And so everything I've learned, I've kind of put in those locations. Anyway, I don't want to say too much, y'all. I don't want problems. I told y'all, I've been telling y'all, I want to say for the last, 20 videos, 20 to 30 videos, I have been saying the same thing, that I'm trying to steer clear of making these videos because I'm trying to stay out of trouble. I do have to document. Things happen like what I'm about to talk about now, where I feel like I need to document to defend myself. Or like the last video, that was, again, advocation of me, but I don't want to say too much and I don't want to get in more problems. And, so I'm just trying to avoid problems, y'all, with these videos and try not to get myself into more problems. So this is going to be a very short video, y'all, not a long one, just kind of documentation of what happened today when I was headed to the gym and defending myself because my brain was ticking again. And those of you that are familiar with my videos and have been following my journey, you know what I mean when I say ticking, meaning, things pushing into my head that I can't control. And if you're familiar with the targeted individual program, you'll be familiar with the fact that you're microchipped as a target. An RFID chip is inserted in your body via an insect drone. And that's part of the links that's located in the description and comment section. But once that's done, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, the RFID chip. It connects to your neurons, and your thoughts are projected. It's called thought projection, i.e. neuromonitoring. You can check out my videos, y'all. I've shared so much information about this on my channel. Not just information about the technology itself, but information about my experience with it. And another video I just recently posted about it 2 weeks ago was titled Mind Reading Technology Used on Targeted Individuals. And you see the thumbnail that says researchers unveil mind reading tech. So there's a plethora of information out there about it. You can simply do a Google search and you'll find research from DARPA and all these different places talking about this technology. So it's a real thing. And it's something that targets have to endure and deal with. It's like, I would say, the most excruciating part about being targeted more than anything else. I've been targeted since 2020, but the neuromonitoring didn't start until the end of 2022 when I got back from trying to relocate off island. If you listen to my videos, y'all will hear about that, right? I tried to relocate, had some reactions, not physical, but I said a lot of offensive things in reaction to the thing following me, and that made my targeting go viral, and it worsened my situation. And so I ended up coming back to the island that I tried to relocate off of, and when I got back, I was microchipped. And so that's when I started dealing with the thought projection, i.e. neuromonitoring. It started in 2022. I'm aware of the fact that I was injected at the end of 2022, but I did not know that my thoughts were being projected, and I didn't really learn about that technology in depth until the middle of last year, 2023. So around June was when I became aware of the fact that my thoughts were being projected. And that was when what I call brain ticking started. That was when it's like this psychological thing where, because people are listening to your thoughts, you start to have like this anxiety that things are going to pop in your head, especially things that they've sensitized you to, right? And so that might start happening, and it's torture, y'all, when it does start happening, because you start to feel like this angst, feeling like, oh my God, what if this pops in my head? And even though it's programming, and I've talked about this in several of my videos, when you're sensitized to something, what they do is they use the shadow networking AI software. And that's something else I've talked about in depth in several videos, y'all. I've even created a part 1 part 2 and part 3, example of shadow networking, AI software utilized on targets video. I've created 3 different parts, y'all, including other videos where I talk about this technology and how they use it to program you and sensitize you to things. So basically what happens is all of your technology, your technological devices get hacked, and whatever app you're utilizing, they are able to manipulate it and send you things to sensitize you. So for instance, let me give you an example. Specifically with my targeting, they like to sensitize me to stealing, not because I've ever stolen, but because of something that I said in my full story when I was talking about what started my targeting in 2020. Something I said about my roommate from my past that they felt was, I guess they felt that was wrong for me to mention that. I didn't mention it in a malicious way. You know, if you listen to my full story, you'll hear why I mentioned it and the comparison I was making. But me mentioning that caused backlash for me. It was one of those things that I mentioned that caused backlash for me. And so to spite me, because they felt like I was wrong for mentioning it, they purposely throw stealing at me and kind of try to make it like I'm a thief when they know I'm not. And I've talked about this in several videos, y'all. If you listen to my full story, you'll hear everything and you'll understand where I'm coming from with that, right? They think I'm a bully. Actually, let me show y'all something. Several times recently, they've sent me things about bullies, right? Now, I only took a screenshot of 3 of them. You know, I'm not going to constantly keep screenshotting what they're sending me, but they constantly keep sending me, you know, this is again them using the AI shadow software network technology, because I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but now I'm showing you a clear example of how they do that. This is another thing that they sensitize me to, aside from stealing, is bullying and me being a bully because of some of the offensive things I've said. Now, anything that I've said that was offensive or disrespectful was in reaction to something that was happening to me. It doesn't justify it, doesn't make it okay, but it's always been a reaction. The problem is that I'm really good with my words and I can hit really low below the belt, and I can be a little bit more vicious than the person that attacked me first. So in other words, let's say this is just an analogy, y'all, not real. Let's say you came out of nowhere and you punched me in my mouth. My reaction in the figurative way would be to pick up a stone and bust your head. That's not comparable. You punched me in my mouth and I picked up a stone and I bust your head. So what I did was worse than what you did to me, but you came at me first. That's just an analogy. I'm not a physical person. I would never physically harm anyone, but I'm just trying to show y'all an example of what I mean when I say my reactions are typically worse than what was done to me, but it's still nonetheless a reaction. But this is why they call me bully. You know, so it's several instances, not many, you know, literally about 3 instances. I'm not going to go into the details. If you listen to my full story, you'll know what I'm talking about. Like 3 instances where I reacted more harshly to what was done to me or said to me. My reaction or my words were more harsh than what was thrown at me. So I'm not a bully, y'all. It's reactive abuse. But at the same time, I need to learn how to not be so harsh with my words. And I can acknowledge that. And I've already apologized several times, too, for the things that I've said. Anyways, guys, so they like to throw the bully thing at me with the shadow networking software. So look at what they sent me recently, y'all. First, this. You can see 16-year-old going against a bully. And then it shows that the bully instantly regrets it, right? That's one thing they sent me in my recommended on YouTube. Another thing, one drunk guy when Khabib was bullied. Now they're throwing the drunk thing in. Now, if you're familiar with my story, you'll also have heard me tell you that I have a past of alcoholism. I've been very real and open about that. I was a blackout drunk for 2 years in my early 20s. Years ago, y'all. Done turned my life around and graduated magna cum laude. Done became a teacher, all these different things. But that's one of the things they throw at me because of my targeting, right? So it's just another thing to kind of lower my self-esteem and hit me below the belt. Kind of just bullying me. They come for me all day long. They come for everything that they can, that they view as negative about me, and even things that aren't negative about me, to kind of make me believe like bad things about myself. You know, and that's just how the targeting works. That's just how the program works when you're targeted. Anyway, another thing about bullying. You see the plaid shirt? Now, those of y'all that have been following me, y'all know I told y'all that's another thing they sensitized me to is plaid, right? So you see the plaid shirt in the thumbnail, and it says gym bully slaps man mid-workout. So they keep throwing the bully word at me, that terminology, that moniker, and trying to throw that title on me, and I'm not a bully. It's just that my response is oftentimes more harsh than what was done to me. It still doesn't change the fact that something was done to me first, but it's my response, and I need to be better with my words. And really, if I'm being real, I started everything. Not being a bully, but being paranoid or being accusatory. So I throw an accusation, it turns into a situation where I get bullied, and then I bully back harsher than the bullying that happened to me. And that's pretty much what happened. But it wasn't malicious, though, the bearing false witness. I know this all sounds like woo-boo-joo-boo if you're new to my channel. Please check out my prior videos, y'all. This is why I told y'all where you can see the links where I tell my story. Because this is all going to sound like not only jargon, because some of the terminology I'm using you won't be familiar if you're new, but it's also like I'm referencing things I've talked about in prior videos. And so if you're new, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. Bearing false witness has played a contentious role in my targeting. I'm not somebody that just goes around bearing false witness, y'all. I've actually, if we're speaking technically, only done it once in my early 20s. But then later, when my targeting started, sending the text message, I insinuated something with that text message. It was PTSD because of what I had incurred in the Airbnbs before I came home. I had a situation in the Airbnbs. It literally started out of nowhere, and it was a coincidence. Not even a coincidence. What do you want to call this? It was just like an unfortunate event. It wasn't something that, it wasn't me accusing anybody of anything. I have an OCD. I don't want to sit here and I'm doing that. I have a bad habit of doing that. I'm not going to tell the whole thing, y'all, but I'm just briefly saying this. Those of y'all that have heard my story already, you're probably rolling your eyes like, oh my God, she's saying the story again. But I have this OCD to do that because sometimes new people will still sit and watch my whole video if it's the first video that they come across from me, instead of going and checking out my story. So basically, shortly before I graduated from college in 2020, I started staying in Airbnbs. I was an older college student. I was 28 when I graduated, and I was staying in the dorms, right? So I went up there at 26, and I was staying in the dorms for about a year, right? I didn't like the situation. Not that anything bad was happening. It was just a normal college experience. But at my age, it wasn't appropriate for me. There was a lot of partying going on. I'm not a Debbie Downer. I had my party days. I know I sound like an old lady. I'm only 32. But I had my party days, especially in my early 20s. I used to go out a lot. And I actually was partying from young. So that's kind of what burnt me out early too. I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me. And I have an older cousin about 4 years older than me. And I used to ramp with them in high school. So I was partying from the age of 15, 14. I was out there. So I had my party years all into my early 20s. And so by the time I was in my late 20s, I was partied out. Not to say that I'm, anti going out. I would go out now too. I'm targeted now. So of course, that's difficult. But if I weren't targeted, I would still be going out and having a good time from time to time. But I was at that age where when you're home, you want to be home. You don't want to hear loud partying and, booming and slamming at all hours of the night at that age. I don't mind going to a party scene, but I don't want to live around it, So I was 26 and it was just too much for me. You had the little young freshman that just got out of high school, got out of the parents' house and did never see come see, and they're partying the up all hours of the night, slamming doors and, just living the regular college experience. I wasn't mad at them. I was more so just like, girl, you got to get your own place. That's how I felt. And then the bathroom situation, that was also a problem because I have a bathroom OCD, which I kind of went off on a tangent with. I was mentioning that a little while ago when I was trying to tell y'all about the Airbnb situation. But since childhood, I've had this OCD with the bathroom where I feel like if the bathroom door is open, and it's been validated, y'all. So apparently I'm onto something. It's not just some fictitious foo-foo, weird thing. I'm onto something apparently, because my brother looked it up and he said, years later, he told me that my OCD actually made sense. But I've always felt like when the bathroom door is open, it's like I'm swallowing toilet water, because I know people are constantly flushing the toilet. I can smell the bathroom. And so I always feel like I'm, somehow swallowing the particles and the nastiness that goes on in the bathroom. People poop, pee, etc. in the bathroom. And so bathrooms just have always made me feel nauseous. And so if they're open, I can always smell them. I always know when the bathroom's open. Even if it's a clean bathroom that smells good, I can still smell it. And so since childhood, I've always had this OCD where if the bathroom's open, I can't swallow my spit. And so everyone in my family knows that. It's just like this running joke with me that they've gotten accustomed to. It was to the point where my younger sister just the other day was referencing the Airbnb situation I'm talking about right now. And she was talking about the fact that I was taping up the bathroom. She said, Reefy, you remember when you were taping up the bathroom? She said every time we came in, we were laughing because we had to untape the bathroom door. This was just the other day. She mentioned this when we were on the porch. And I said, you remember that? She said, of course. She said, we all know that. I said, I'm just glad you're saying it out loud because it more so validates my story and what I said, about what led to me sending the text. Anyway, so that's what was going on. It was just like a lot of partying. I was an older college student. I didn't want to live around that. And then I'm going in the bathroom and the bathroom was a hot mess. Like it was like period blood all over the toilet, poops, like somebody was exploding on the toilet every other night, shit all over. I think because they were partying and getting drunk. I think girls were getting sick and just doing nastiness in there. They were young too and stuff. Pads in the freaking shower, just real nastiness is going on in there. And I'm not judging them. I'm just saying it was too much for me at that age, at 26, So I put up with it for a year. And it wasn't no big situation like that because I also loved my campus. It was a private university. We had a good cafeteria. We had a nice little pond. It was a small knit community and I knew everyone. Everyone knew my sister and I. So I got along good on campus. So it wasn't like this rush to get out. It wasn't unbearable, but I wanted my own place. So about a year in, at age 27, I started looking into apartments. At this time, I had started subbing. I was a substitute teacher for Broward County Public Schools. And I was doing security at night. And I didn't have any big set of bills to pay. I had my own car. I had purchased a little cheap car, about $3,000. And it was in working condition. So I didn't have any major bills to pay aside from insurance and my phone bill. So I had money. So I started looking into apartments and stuff. And despite having money, South Florida is extremely expensive. My university was located in Miami Gardens, South Florida. And so all of the apartments I was seeing were extremely expensive. And so I remember just talking to my mom about it and her telling me it would be smarter to just get an Airbnb. So that's what I did. I got an Airbnb. I stayed in a bunch of Airbnbs, y'all, for about a half a year. I was in and out of different Airbnbs. No problem, right? Good experiences, good ratings on my Airbnb app. I complained to my mom. I was like, I'm tired of moving. I'm like, every week or every other week I'm having to move. And I had so much clothes, y'all. Contrary to what's happening now. I barely have any clothes, y'all. I have like one buffalo of clothes. And half of them are like raggy, house clothes. I gave away all my good clothes, because I was tired of moving from place to place and it was too much. I had like 3 suitcases full of clothes because I used to like to dress nice. I had heels and stuff and I was teaching. And I was like, I could get it back. I had money and I wasn't really thinking in foresight that you never know what's going to happen in the future. I was just like, I could get it back. I've always been like that with my stuff. I don't really hold on to stuff. And so I remembered giving half of it away to Goodwill because I was tired of having to move so much stuff, every week or every other week when I was moving from Airbnb to Airbnb. And still, even after giving away half of my stuff, I still was just tired of the moving. And so my mom was like, well, why don't you speak to the Airbnb host you're with now? You said he's a nice guy. Why don't you ask him if you can do a long-term Airbnb? So to me, that sounded like a good idea. I said, well, I don't see why I don't do that for real. So I remember contacting him. Him and I already had a good repertoire, very nice guy. And he had multiple properties in South Florida. And I remember just telling him, he already knew I was a college student. Him and I had already spoken. I remember just telling him and asking him, if I could stay in a long-term Airbnb. Is that something you do? Because I'm tired of moving and I'm in school and it's stressful. Just something like that, the conversation. That's how it went. And so I remember him telling me, sure. He said, you're a really good guest. He said, I've done this for a college student before. He said, as a matter of fact, I'm going to move you into the same Airbnb that I had her in. That's what he told me. So I got excited. I'm like, okay, so this is going to low-key kind of be like my first official apartment. I've had apartments before, but they were shared. When I lived in Tallahassee, I had shared apartments with my sister, my brother-in-law. At one point in time, this roommate that used to be a childhood friend, the one I talked about a little while ago with the stealing thing, that I talked about in my full story. So I've had apartments before since my early years, right? My early 20s. I would even say teens. Yeah, when I was 18, I got my first apartment. But I had never had my own apartment. So this was kind of like, in a way, even though it wasn't technically an apartment, it was like an Airbnb extended stay. In a way, this was kind of like my first apartment that I would have by myself, is how I felt. So I was excited. So anyways, got into the Airbnb. As soon as I got in there, y'all, it was a problem. He had connected Airbnbs. So all of his Airbnbs were connected to different units. And so this one that he moved me to was connected to this main house. And it was in the back of the main house. And then there were 2 small units connected to each other with a connecting door behind the main house. And so I was in the first unit. And then there was this elderly couple in the second unit. And what separated our apartment was a connecting door. So when I went in there, right next to the connecting door is my bathroom. And I noticed it was a sliding door. So it wasn't a door that closes. And it had a big, huge gap all around it. So it's like, oh my God, the bathroom air is escaping. This is all I could think. And nobody really understands OCD. You know what's funny? The other day they sent me to tease me. I told y'all I like to watch the show What Would You Do? They sent me, I told you they like to shadow network like crazy with that show. I went off on a tangent. I was explaining to y'all what shadow networking is for those of you that are new to the channel. And then I kind of went off on a tangent. But so basically, y'all, they hack your technological devices and they send you things with stimuli in it to sensitize you. So I told you about the stealing thing. They will constantly, in my recommended on YouTube, send me videos about stealing, right? Or thieves, right? Or burglary, etc. Or things like what I just showed you in my photos about bullies, constantly in my recommended, sending me stuff about bullies. The hack every app you use. If I go on Pool, they're playing against me with an avatar that relates to something they're trying to sensitize me to. And in my targeting, y'all, they sensitize me to a lot of things. So it's been torture. Everything makes my brain tick at this point. There's so many things that have become stimuli for me that will make things pop into my head. And so that's another thing they like to do, hack my pool game because they know I like pool and play against me with things to sensitize me. Anyway, so back to what I was saying though. So in the Airbnb, I saw, my worst nightmare. The bathroom door is a sliding bathroom door with all these big, huge gaps and the air is escaping. So instantly I'm like, I can't be comfortable in here. I'm not gonna be able to swallow my spit. And I had already just moved all of my stuff out the truck. And I open the door and I go inside and I see this. And I say truck because at this time my car had stopped working. I had this weird, just as I told y'all, it's just like been like constantly these inexplainable, unfortunate events since my early 20s. I had paid that car off in full too. And that wasn't a car accident. I went to this backdoor mechanic. He was a Jamaican. My brother-in-law used him, had been using him for years. And of course I trust my brother-in-law. So I went to his mechanic. And he was a fellow island guy too, so I didn't mind giving him business. He was charging a cheap rate, and it seemed like he knew what he was doing. So I had this electrical problem. I'm not trying to go off on a tangent, y'all. I'm just trying to quickly tell y'all what led to me driving the big old jalopy truck I was driving, my dad's truck. So I took my car to him because I was having an electrical issue where the window, for some reason, wouldn't go up. Like, it just stopped halfway, and it was raining off and on. Y'all know if you've stayed in South Florida how unpredictable the weather is. So I was like, I can't deal with this, with the window staying like this, because my car is going to get messed up. And then too, it seemed like something was going on with the electrical system because it's not like I was having issues starting the car. This is why I knew it wasn't a battery issue, but the lights would flicker on and off when I would start the car. It was like this weird thing going on with the circuits with the car. And so I remember taking it to this mechanic and him telling me, oh, that's simple. That's a simple fix. I could fix it. And I trusted him. Again, I started using him because of my brother-in-law, and I had used him before. He had fixed simple things for my car before, like the AC. That was one thing he fixed for me. Another thing was something with my tire, simple fixes. So I hadn't gone to him for big work. And although this seemed like a simple fix, your electrical system in your car, that's actually a big fix, no matter how simple it might seem. And so he took the car, for an hour, seemed like he knew what he was doing, gave me back the car, charged me a cheap rate. And I reached like halfway down the road. And mind you, he stayed in Fort Lauderdale and I was staying on campus in Miami, right? When my car got ruined. My car got ruined before I started staying in the Airbnbs. So I'm sorry, I'm hearing the chicken and it's distracting me, y'all. So I'm driving down to Miami Gardens, right? And this is like a 40-minute drive, sometimes 60 minutes, depending on which road you take. I'm driving, I noticed the car starts smoking, right? It starts smoking while I'm headed down. So I'm like, what the heck is going on? I'm seeing it smoke. I'm like, damn, do I have to turn around? Because I'm like, I don't want to have to turn all the way around. I had reached a good way, y'all. When this started happening, I'm like, oh my God, I might have to turn around and go back to him. Like, what is this? And then it started smoking real bad and the light started flickering. So I was like, oh, hell no, I'm going to turn around. I was like, let me turn around and get my money back and let him, or not, if I don't get my money back, at least let him fix whatever is going on. So I turned around, did a U-turn, and the thing started to go like crazy, y'all, bananas. The thing just started to really smoke and go crazy, and the electrical lights going off and on, and then the thing just burst into flames. So I remember stopping on the road at that point because it was not drivable anymore, and just realizing I need to get out of this thing, right? So I put it in park, and I'm trying to get out, and I can't get out. The door is like literally the electrical circuits was causing the door to not be able to unlock, and the thing is bursting into flames. So I'm like, what the hell is this? This was part of why I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, y'all. But if you listen to my full story, you'll hear why I thought certain things were taking place. Because since my early 20s, weird things like that have been happening to me. Even in my brother-in-law's truck, I borrowed it from him. The brakes were bad. He had been driving it, right? I take it now. I borrow it. All of a sudden, the brake completely gone, and I'm heading down a road into 4-lane traffic. These near-death experiences and scary experiences since my early 20s, like this weird thing. And somehow the Most High keeps pulling me and saving me. It's this weird thing, y'all. And this is why I felt like what I said in my full story. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because it turned into an accusation thrown at me. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to open that can of worms again. But this is why I said what I said in my full story, because it's literally been these weird, uncanny, astronomically strange things since my early 20s. And anyways, so that's where I was going with, because I'm going down the rabbit hole, y'all. Got to be careful. If you listen to my full story, you'll hear where I was coming from as far as the spiritual goals and why I felt like something spiritual was at play, because I got so much backlash for saying that too, y'all. But literally since my early 20s, these type of things have been happening to me. Anyway, so the car went kaput. That's long story short. The car gone. Paid for that car in full, car gone. Done. Right? So I ended up having to use my father's truck. My father was staying in Florida. He's a welder, right? He was in Texas initially. He had relocated there just for a little bit. He's still married to my mom. But at the time, he needed work. The main refinery here on island had shut down, and he's a welder. And so a lot of the welders here on island relocated to different locations in the mainland to find work. And so my dad had found a job in Texas, and he had bought this big, huge white truck. And then he ended up eventually traveling down to Florida, staying there for a little bit before he relocated back to island. And so he left his big truck up there, that was too expensive to ship. And so luckily for me, I was able to use that when my car went kaput. So little old me, I'm not even say little, I'm a big girl, I'm 5'8", but still I looked little in that big old truck. It looked odd to see a female driving such a big old truck. I was, lugging around in this big, huge white worker man truck. But anyway, so I pulled up to the Airbnb, and I think all of that might have intimidated the elderly couple. I just think they saw me pull in, right, with this big old truck. I think that was intimidating to them. I think I have a presence to me. I've been told this before, where I look stuck up or like a bitch or mean. And I'm not a mean person, despite what people say or think, whatever preconceived notion they have. I just have what's called resting bitch face. And it's not intentional. That's just me. Some women are like that, or some men, some people, where their face just naturally looks like they have an attitude or something. And that's not the case. That's just their face. So I think all of that was intimidating to that elderly couple when I pulled up. And so I think that also added to what happened. So anyways, because I went off on a tangent, tell y'all about that car that got ruined. So back to where I was at, where I went to this long-term Airbnb, my first long-term Airbnb. So I go in and I see the bathroom situation. I'm like, this is not going to work for me. I remember calling my mother complaining. I'm like, Mom, you won't believe. Like the Airbnb he moved me to, of all things, has a bathroom door that's sliding. I said, I can't swallow my spit in here. And so she was telling me, well, why don't you just ask him to move you to another location? And I thought about it, and to this day, I regret not doing that. I just told myself I'll just stuff up the bathroom door. Everything else was A1. I liked the location. I loved the unit. I liked the fact that I had neighbors. At the time, I had never been targeted before, so having neighbors was a good thing. And so I liked having neighbors. I felt safe as a woman in Miami, a young woman. And so I was like, this is a good situation. I'm going to just block up the bathroom door. That's how I felt. And so I took the comforter off the bed, and I started to block up the bathroom door once I moved my stuff in. That was the worst thing I could have ever did. That was the start of what led to me becoming a targeted individual. Understand that simple action right there. Because I stuffed up the cracks with the comforter, And remember what I told you. This bathroom was located right next to the connecting door to the other unit where the elderly couple stayed. So I'm stuffing up the door, and I notice I'm starting to hear stuff on the other side of the connecting door. Like I'm hearing, like this dog barking, and then I'm hearing them like ruffling, and then I'm hearing them like they're pushing stuff up against the door, and then they're acting like they're locking the door and all this kind of weird stuff. And I was like, oh shit. I thought this in my head. I didn't say this out loud. I was like, I hope they don't think I'm messing with the door. I'm like, I'm just here trying to stuff up the bathroom door. And I had done this in prior Airbnbs. I was so glad again when my younger sister told me she remembered that I had done that with several other Airbnbs. Because there were a few other Airbnbs I had stayed in, not long-term ones that I stayed in for about a week or two, where it was a similar situation where the bathroom door had some sort of issue where it wasn't closed all the way, like a sliding bathroom door or something like that, where I taped it up. I used to go to Dollar Tree and get tape and tape it up if possible. But this one in particular was, like, it was like literally, I can't even really explain it to you. It was a sliding door where tape wouldn't have worked. I literally had to stuff it up with a comforter. So I was like, oh my God, I hope they don't think I was trying to get into their door. I'm like, I'm just trying to stuff up the bathroom door. I'm like, oh my God. I remembered feeling mortified about that. And so I remembered sitting on the bed, kind of freezing and feeling paranoid about the fact that they probably thought I was trying to get into their room. And then just kind of like, let me just leave the bathroom door alone for now. I'm going to have to just try and figure this thing out. So you can imagine that was uncomfortable for me because I was spitting every minute due to what was going on with the bathroom door. But anyways, I just noticed after that, it seemed like every time I moved in the room, in the unit, they would be moving too and like sounding like they're pushing stuff up against the door. They put the dog by the door to bark. And so I remember that traumatizing me. I'd started to feel like uncomfortable to move in the unit. And it was in such close proximity of the other unit, connecting door, separating us, that you could hear my movements just as much as I could hear theirs. So every time I'm moving and just trying to be comfortable, they're doing stuff by the door. And that was my first gang stalking experience and noise campaign experience. I wasn't a target yet, but that was the start, right? So from there, that just continued on the whole time I stayed in that unit, the whole duration of my stay. And I remember calling my mom and my sisters and explaining to them what was going on and complaining. And they were cracking up. They thought it was the funniest thing ever. They're telling me, why do you care? They said you should be hopping on the bed. And, they were making it a big joke and saying they would be doing this and that on the bed. But they know how my personality is, at least used to be. I've changed now that I'm targeted. I really don't care as much like how I used to. But I really cared that they thought that I was trying to get into the room or whatever it is that they thought. And so I was making myself uncomfortable in this unit that I was paying rent for because I didn't want to make them uncomfortable. And so it was just a nightmare for me. That was the start of the nightmare. That was the start of it. And so I remember just being so uncomfortable that eventually I asked him to move me, the host. And so he never indicated that they said anything to him. He was still mannerful. The repertoire was still good. It didn't seem like anything had happened, but I do believe they had told him something. Because although he didn't move different with me and he didn't tell me no about putting me in a new unit, I think he was more so just now watching me. Because I'm sure he knew those people, that elderly couple. He probably had been working with them, for a while. He probably, who knows how long he knew them, it seems like they were the same nationality too. So it might have been his family and all, who knows? Because sometimes people that own Airbnbs let family stay with them. I did that in my third Airbnb before coming home, where the worst gang stalking happened. I stayed in a family member's Airbnb. So they might have been relatives to him and all. They were all Cuban. So I'm not really certain. But I remembered him moving me to the second Airbnb. And at this time, I was dating a Colombian guy. And I asked him to move in with me because I didn't feel comfortable with what had happened to me in the first Airbnb. It wasn't my first Airbnb stay, but my first long-term Airbnb and my first gang stalking experience. So I remember at this time, I had only been dating the guy for about 2 months. I didn't even really, I would never typically move that quick in with a man. But I felt comfortable with him. He was a really nice guy. And I felt like I wanted somebody to stay with me after what had happened in the first Airbnb to me. So I remembered him moving in with me, and he was a witness. He heard everything that was going on. In that second Airbnb, it wasn't a connecting door like the one I had just moved from. But what was going on here was, it was still a bunch of units on a compound that were close together. And although my unit was kind of separate to the others where it wasn't connected to the other units, my unit had a storage room attached to it. And there was a wall separating my unit from the storage room. And so it was this maintenance man that used to be in that storage room at all hours of the night. It actually seemed like he was staying in there. And it seemed like he was monitoring us, because I was kind of hearing similar noise campaigns to what I was hearing in that first Airbnb with the elderly couple, except not as intense, nowhere near as intense. But I did notice sometimes when we noise would happen in our unit, we'll hear stuff in the next unit. And so my boyfriend noticed it too. He was hearing it too. It wasn't just me. It wasn't like I was going crazy. He was hearing it too. He just thought it was funny and he laughed. He just thought he's not the kind of, like me where I care about everything. And I'm not like that anymore. After my target, I really don't care. But then I used to care about everything and, everything mattered. And I still was bothered and perturbed about the fact that they might have even thought I was trying to get in the room in the first place. All of that bothered me. Whereas for him, he just thought it was funny and like, it's not that serious type of thing, right? So anyways, that happened. And eventually I ended up just moving into a third Airbnb unit that belonged to someone in my close circle. So no longer staying with that host. Didn't end on a bad note with him. Very nice guy. It was really just that I had stayed in that unit for about 2 months. And then someone in my close circle started doing Airbnb. She purchased a house, she rented out a house in a neighborhood and she started doing Airbnb out of it. And she said, well, if that's happening over there, why don't you just come stay with me? She was telling me that she would let me stay in the private unit that was in the back of the house. So she was doing a shared Airbnb. There were 3 bedrooms in the main house where she was going to rent out to different people, different hosts, different guests, And she told me that I could stay in the back unit that was connected by a connecting door to the main house. And I could stay in the private unit in the back. And she was going to charge me a cheaper rate. So I was like, okay, well, this sounds good. I know for sure I'm not going to be dealing with any weird stuff there. So I didn't mind. I was excited about that. So I remembered moving into that unit and everything was normal at first. The person in my close circle even stayed the night with me in the unit. She stayed a couple nights with me. And then she got her first guest, aside from me, her first official guest in the main house. And so this was a lady, right? An older lady, not much older. I was at my time in my late 20s. I think this lady was in her 40s. Big heavy set lady, the way they made it seem like they tried to gaslight me about it. Again, just trying to make me feel accused. Like as if I would be trying anything with this lady. This lady could have beat my ass from here to freaking, I don't know, Timbuktu. Right? I'm a tough girl. I'm tall. I'm 5'8" and I'm muscular. This was a heavy, hefty lady, right? And she was older than me. And she was from Chicago. The rough parts. She let us know. So I'm sure she could have knocked my block off if she wanted to, right? Anyway, so she moved in. And the first night she moved in, the person in my close circle that owns the Airbnb stayed with me. So we're just hearing her all night long, right? We noticed 2 o'clock come, 3 o'clock come. She's still slamming stuff. She's drinking. She had guests over. When you come to a vacation state like Florida, you do want to have a party, especially if it's like your first night. So that's understandable. So it's not like we were, again, trying to be Debbie Downers, like, don't do this, that kind of way. Like, not at all. We didn't tell her anything, even though it was a shared Airbnb. It's kind of like this known thing that when you're in a shared Airbnb, you should be conscious of the other guests. And I did notice a lot of the shared Airbnbs that I stayed in, they would have that as a disclaimer because apparently that's a common problem. People being in shared Airbnbs and being too loud. So they would have it as a disclaimer that after a certain hour, this and that with the noise level. She didn't seem to have that understanding, and my sister didn't have any disclaimers on the Airbnb. She just had started it, right? No, oh my God, I said the relationship. It doesn't matter, y'all. The person in my close circle didn't have any disclaimers on the Airbnb. So all night long, this lady was partying, like living her best life out there, just super loud. And my sister and I were just like, whoa. So my sister, she was like, I might have to talk to so-and-so, her fiance, her husband at the time, about this. If it continues, just let me know is what she told me. So I said, okay. So, a good week passed. I noticed she's still being loud every night. It wasn't like the first night where it was like a party. It wasn't like she had people over every night sometimes. But it was literally mostly just her slamming in and out. And she might have like one guest in there where she's on the phone like screaming. And the kitchen was right outside of my connecting door. So I was connected to the back of the house in a private unit. And my connecting door led to the kitchen of the main house. And so she was constantly in the kitchen, slamming the cabinets, in and out of the fridge. I know I sound like a Debbie Downer. They're making the rooster go off. But please understand, even the person in my close circle acknowledged that the loudness coming from this lady was ridiculous because it's going to sound like this habitual thing with me where I have a problem with noises and I'm being this Debbie Downer petty bitch. It's not that. It's like in the college situation again. I acknowledge that I understand that that's what's going to happen on university grounds or campus grounds. I understood that. That's why I knew I had to get my own place. I never complained about those girls because I understood. I was young too, right? I understand it's college life. I just wanted to get my own place. In the other Airbnbs I stayed in, I had no issues. The only issue I had a problem with noise where I had to complain was where I'm now paying for a shared Airbnb and you're not being considerate of the fact that you're in a shared Airbnb. You know, you do it one night, okay. 2 night, okay. 3 night, okay. The whole damn week? Now we going into week 2 and every night it's like a damn party? I'm like, come on now. I might as well just stayed in the dorms. You know, and I'm paying for this too. So I remember, telling my sister, I said, look, you might have to talk to, so-and-so, her husband, about this, because every night this lady's still doing the same thing. I'm having trouble sleeping. And at this time, y'all, I was working 3 jobs. I was working at the post office. I was a carrier, and that's a hard job. Anybody that works that job, especially if you've done it in the States, in Florida, would understand how hard that job is. So I was a carrier for the post office. I was still a substitute teacher, and I was doing security, and I had a full load of classes. And understand, I wasn't taking it lightly. I was writing paper after paper after paper. I graduated magna cum laude. I had a lot going on, and I needed to sleep. I was like a zombie around then. And so this was just too much. Her making all this noise every night. I'm like, oh my God, I can't, I'm sorry. Like, I don't want to be like that bitch that rap, but I had to really say something. So I told my sister, and I remember her telling her husband, and her husband spoke to her, and she literally listened. Very pleasant. It's not like she got an attitude or anything like that. She listened, and the noises really toned down. I would still hear her at night every now and then when I would wake up, but it wasn't like before she's slamming stuff and literally waking me up out of my sleep. It wasn't that. So everything was cool after that. Another 2-week pass, about a month in that Airbnb, no issues, aside from the first 2 weeks where the noise stuff was happening. Unintentional noise, not any gang stalking, anything. About 2 more weeks passed now since she quieted down. Been there for about a month, no problem. I used to, when I came in, the only time I would go into the main house was to get my stuff out the fridge. And I regret to this day not getting a little mini fridge for my room. Now my sister has changed it up to where that private unit has a fridge in it. But she didn't have that back then. So I would literally have to cross over into the main house to get to the fridge if I wanted to get my refrigerated stuff. And so because I'm such a hermit, and not in this kind of way where like I can't get along with people. I mean, I'm kind of more so like that now. Not that I can't get along with people, but more so hide from people and hermit lifestyle, that kind of way. Because of my targeting, I've always been reserved. I've always been shy. I've always been slightly awkward, socially inept. But I can function, man, and I know how to socialize. I learned how to do it. I was even teaching. It wasn't to the point where now where I'm targeted, where it's like kind of like hiding from people type of thing. It wasn't like that then. So for me, it was more so just like I stay to myself. I'm a private person, but I can interact and it's not a problem. But I used to purposely try to make sure that I would go into that kitchen as soon as I got off from work. So go in, hop through the door, get my stuff, come back over, lock the door. That was my thing, my routine. This day, I went over as soon as I got off work. Got whatever I got. At this time, I was on the keto diet. I've always been into dieting and working out and stuff. So I was doing something called the keto diet back then. So I didn't have to cook anything. I just had like a wrap or whatever. And I used to just put together like this little healthy wrap, and I had my drink my water. I was pulling out the fridge. Grabbed my stuff, came over, forgot to lock the door. Right? So typically I would come over and lock the door right away so she wouldn't hear me locking it. If I lock it while I close it, you're not hearing me lock it. And me locking it isn't a problem anyways, but I didn't want to seem like this bougie bitch. I had already ratted on her for the noises, and I don't want it to seem like I'm now locking up my door like I feel like you're going to do something to me. And she had already let us know she came from a rough part of Chicago and this, and I just didn't want to seem like that girl that was looking down or being bougie. So I used to make sure every time I went through and I came back over, I locked the door so she won't hear me locking it. So I remember this time I forgot to lock the damn door. And I regret it's all these little small things, y'all, that had it been done different, had I not forgot this, had I not, just little small things that had it been done differently, I think my whole outcome would have been different. Anyway, I forgot to lock the door, and I sat in the bed, I ate my food, I drank my water, whatever, about to settle in, and I look up and I notice that the door is not locked. And I have this OCD where before I settle into anywhere, I always like to look and make sure the door is locked. That's why I look and I realize I didn't lock the door. I'm like, damn, because I'm hearing her right there on the couch. It was still early. It was nighttime at this point, but still early. It was like 7 or 8 at night. And so I'm hearing her on the couch. She's watching TV. I think she was like smoking a cigarette or whatever. And I'm just hearing her out there. And so I didn't want to offend her. You know, I didn't want to get up and lock the door loud and her feel some kind of way. So I got up and I tried to lock it quietly. I literally turned it very soft. And I noticed as soon as I did that, I hear her turn something up on her phone. Right? So I'm like, oh no. I'm like, I heard her turn something up as soon as I went to lock the door. And so I don't know, I got awkward about that, and I think it was just PTSD triggering in from what happened to me with the elderly couple, and then feeling like I was being monitored in the next Airbnb. So as soon as I went to lock the door and I hear her turn up whatever, she was probably just turning something up on her phone. It probably had nothing to do with me, and I took that as her doing like a noise campaign. And so I remember, and I didn't know that that was the term back then, y'all. You know, now I'm familiar with what noise campaign really is. But what was happening back then, although I wasn't a target, is comparable to noise campaigns. What happened in that first Airbnb, that first long-term Airbnb with the elderly couple, that's noise campaign. The same thing that happens to targets with noise campaign. Only difference is I wasn't a target and I wasn't being watched on camera. But they were literally listening to my movements in that unit and making noises every time I moved. So anyway, in this third Airbnb, that's what started it up. It was me. And it was literally PTSD because of what had happened in the 2 prior Airbnbs. So when she did that, I remember sitting on the bed and getting offended and just automatically thinking about what had happened to me in the other 2 Airbnbs. And so when she moved now, I made a noise. And so from there, it kind of started turning into this thing right away. It happened so quick where every time she would move in the kitchen and stuff, I would purposely make noise in my unit. And as she started doing it back to me. And so it turned into this thing where it was similar to what was happening with the elderly couple, except I was making the noises back now. And also, I started it this time. And I don't even think it was what I thought it was now that I think about it. I think it was PTSD. And I think I created a situation for myself in that third Airbnb. The first Airbnb was just unfortunate. It wasn't my fault. It was my fault. But it wasn't like intentional like it was in the third Airbnb. So anyways, she and I just started doing noise campaigns to each other after that. Every time I'm hearing her, I'm making noises. Every time she's hearing me, she's making noises. So eventually, about 2 weeks later, these 2 guys moved in from 2 different locations. They didn't know each other, 2 different states. They happened to move in at the same time. All 3 of them started doing noise campaigns on me because I wasn't aware of the fact that they had moved in. You know, I just noticed this one day, the noise campaign seemed like it had amped up. It was really bad. I was like, what the hell is going on? I was like, whoa, she must have friends over today. You know, this is how I felt. I'm like, she's really going ham today. And so I remember just thinking, wow, damn, what is going on? And I'm hearing talking and they were really laughing and just doing the thing crazy, all 3 of them. And so I didn't even know how many people it was. I just noticed that the noise campaigns amped up and it was really bad. And so I noticed as the days progressed, I'm still hearing the same voices. And I'm like, wait a minute, did new people move in? And so then I remember talking with my sister and her telling me, yeah, these 2 new guys moved in. And so I was like, oh shit. So she probably got to know them. Explain to them whatever her side of the story is, whatever her view on it is. She probably thought I was some nut in there that just started doing random noises on her, which I don't blame her. It probably did seem that way, and she didn't understand that it was PTSD from what I had just experienced in the 2 prior Airbnbs. But all 3 of them started doing the noise campaigns on me, so it started turning into this gang stalking-like situation in that third Airbnb. And so it was just bad, y'all. Until I graduated, I stayed in that Airbnb that belonged to my sister. It was about 3 to 4 months of me dealing with really bad noise campaigns. They amped it all the way up. It was so bad. It got so bad they started pulling out the router, the internet router. And so I was on my laptop doing schoolwork and stuff, and they were forcing me to have to venture over into the main house. I would try to avoid having to go over there. And because they kept pulling out the internet, I would have to, I would force to go over there. And when I would cross over there, all laughing and just acting immature, man, for grown people. They were all older than me. They were all in their 40s and I was in my late 20s, and they're just acting so immature. I understand I started it. I acknowledge that, so I'm not going to sit here and fake the funk. That was me. That was my bad. But they were so immature about it, man. They were having the sweetest laugh ever, all 3 of them over there, big grown ass people. And so they kept pulling out the internet and plugging out my laptop and just all kind of stupidness, man. It was a nightmare. It got so bad I started staying in my dad's truck. After towards the end of my stay in the Airbnbs up there, I started staying in my dad's truck, although I'm paying my sister for the Airbnb. I was literally just using it to bathe at a certain point because I felt so uncomfortable there. But at least in that moment, I could leave and escape. You know, it wasn't like cameras were on me. It's not like I'm being followed everywhere I go. It's not like what it turned into. Who knew that there's actually a program that emulates what I had experienced prior to being put in that program? For me, I'm just like, it all felt spiritual. I'm like, how? You know, and this is why I was just like so certain that something was on me. I was like, no way. Like, what the you know, it was just all crazy and weird how it happened, and it happened so quick too. So anyways, so long story short, y'all, it was months and months of me dealing with the craziness. You know, I remember one night, you know, one morning, wee hours of the morning, I called my sister and my mom crying because I woke up, it was like 5 a.m. or something like that. And I woke up kind of snorting and catching my breath and stuff. You know, I've already explained to y'all I have sinuses, chronic sinusitis. It's not really, that's not the technical term for it because it's not sinusitis, but it emulates that. It's like this deformity I have. I don't want to talk about it again in this video, y'all. It's redundant. It's actually redundant me repeating the Airbnb story. But this thing with my nose where it's like this deformity, and, you know, when I was younger, the doctor told my mom I would need surgery. You know, apparently I have extra tissue in there or whatever it is. My turbines are extra thick. And so the doctor was telling my mom that I would need surgery to remove some of it, or I would always have like this chronic stuffy nose. My mom gave me the choice. I chose not to get the surgery. You know, always been into natural health from young, you know, not into medication, surgeries, etc. Not judging anybody that's into that stuff. Everybody has their own preference. So anyways, y'all, woke up that morning, you know, my nose like snorting, trying to catch my breath or whatever. It was just a bad morning. And I'm hearing them because they used to, this is what they were doing. They started like monitoring me 24/7. I forgot to mention this. I said this in my full story. You know, it started being this thing where they would have somebody by the sink in the kitchen, right on the other side of my connecting door all night long. So if I woke up and I even went to turn on my side or anything, they're turning on the faucet. They're turning on the faucet. And it's like they were taking shifts. It was literally like the targeted individual program with the noise campaigns, y'all. Like so similar, and I wasn't a target yet. Isn't that crazy? So anyways, this morning, you know, I wake up trying to catch my breath and I'm snorting, trying to catch my breath. And I hear whoever it was taking shift there by the sink doing snorting sounds and laughing. I heard and somebody cracking up by the door, you know? And so I'm just like, what the heck? I remember it just making me cry because it had been months of me dealing with the stupidness, right? So I remember crying, and I called my mom and my sister, and I was crying and talking to them, and they were just like, you know, not acknowledging it and seeming like they thought I was having mental health issues or something like that. And so it was just, you know, the start of like the real nightmare. That wasn't the start of it. Really, the start of it was in that Airbnb with the elderly couple. It started from an innocent gesture, an OCD, and it culminated into me becoming a target. So anyways, y'all, let me hurry up and try and wrap the video up. I think I hear my sister coming home and stuff, walking down the road, and I don't like to do these videos when anyone's home, and it wasn't supposed to be a long video anyways, y'all. I was really supposed to document what happened today and explain why my brain was ticking today, and I went off on such a tangent. You know, I haven't done that in a long time, where I go off on a tangent and I start repeating things I've said already. But one thing about me, y'all, when I tell my story, any story that I've told, I will always tell the story the same exact way because I'm telling you verbatim what happened. And if you listen to my full story, if you listen to my summary, any of my videos where I'm telling my story, nothing changes. I could tell this story verbatim all day long because this has been my experience. And now I'm a target. So anyways, let me hurry up and try to wrap this thing up, y'all, because I didn't mean to go into telling that story again. It's just like I needed kind of to give that backdrop to again explain my innocence and what was created from the text and why it's ludicrous. And why when my brain starts to tick, that's not indicative of guilt. It's programming and PTSD. So anyways, forgot what I was going to say though. So that thing happened, right? The Airbnb situation, eventually I moved back home. You know, I told y'all already I had got an interview with one of the schools that I used to sub at, and I got hired on with them. And, you know, I was supposed to be working for them, and I decided to come home instead. You know, it was a mix of what was happening in that Airbnb, in addition to the fact, if you listen to my prior videos, the circumstances under which I would be hired. They were telling me that I would have to be an interim sub until I got my teaching certificate. And I wanted the title of teacher. And I remembered my mother telling me that if I came home and I taught at the school she was teaching at, or I taught for the Department of Education here on island, I would be able to have the title of English teacher while I took courses to get my teaching certificate. And what they do is they give you something called a provisional certification. And so that's what I was banking on. You know, it was a mix of that in addition to the fact that that Airbnb thing traumatized me. It really traumatized me. So I was like, I need to go home. And I was missing home. I really was. I was on the line. I really was on the line about whether or not I want to come home or stay in Florida. Because I used to love Florida. I did. But those Airbnb situations really scarred me. And so I remember deciding to come home, right? After experiencing that crazy ass, Airbnb situation for months on end. So then I come home, I'm skipping over everything now. If you listen to my full story or my summary or my commentating over a clip video, any one of those 3 videos, you'll hear my full story of what started my targeting in 2020. You'll hear everything in depth, right? I'm skipping over everything because I didn't even mean to redundantly repeat the story. But I felt the need to because of what I'm going to be talking about today and the brain ticking, and just avocation again of me and my innocence. So anyways, so I ended up moving back home. This fight happened in the household with the people in my close circle and myself. And the fight kind of put me on edge. It made me feel like there was some sort of tension amongst the people in my close circle and myself. I'm not going to go into the details about everything, y'all. Again, listen to my full story video or my commentating over a clip video or my summary video. All 3 of those videos are located in the description box and comment section. And you can hear my story, y'all. And the fight that I'm referencing now and what led to me sending the text that started my targeting. So anyway, after that fight happened in the household with the people in my close circle and myself, I sent the text message. Basically, I was staying in the room with my 2 nieces, right? Stayed with them many times before I traveled down with them. Practically raised my oldest niece, the one whose name pops in my head from time to time because of sensitization and programming. I was staying in the room with them at the time when I sent the text message. And basically, I texted someone in my close circle, and I just let her know that, after the fight, it kind of felt like I was hearing noise campaigns in the hallway at night, right? And I said, I didn't accuse them. This is why I'm making it very clear that the text message wasn't an accusation. It was an insinuation and a question. I said, I know y'all wouldn't gaslight me, right? And I was basically just kind of insinuating that they were doing to me what had happened to me in the Airbnbs for months. I understand it was about a half a year of me dealing with that situation. I stayed in the first Airbnb for about a month, right? I stayed in the second Airbnb for 2 months. And then I stayed in the third Airbnb for about 3 months. So it was about half a year of me dealing with that gang stalking like situation and scenario. The third Airbnb, it got so bad, I told you I was staying in my father's truck. So understand I had PTSD and trauma when I came home. And then we got in that fight, the people in my close circle and myself. And I felt like I was hearing the noises in the hallway at night all of a sudden. I think I was hearing the same noises I had been hearing. And I just felt like they were doing, I in my own freaking convoluted mind, I think I just started to feel like they were doing to me what happened to me in the Airbnbs. And so I sent that text message, the dreaded text message that created my targeting. Let's use sense or common sense or make sense of things. If I were in that room, and I know they know I wasn't doing anything, again, it's about bearing false witness, but still let's just make sense of things and why that doesn't even make sense. If God forbid I were in the room doing anything, right? Why would I be so stupid? Or let's put it like this. Why would I think you were so stupid? Not to sound condescending. Why would I think you were so stupid as to think I was in there doing something and you would be making noises in the hallway rather than busting the room door open? Who does that? Why would you think someone is in the room doing something to a child? Yah forbid again. I hate even having to say it, but that's what was created from the text, and it's all out of spite, y'all. Again, it's vigilante retribution for bearing false witness and what they term as me being a bully. Why would I think that you would be so stupid as to think I was in the room doing anything and not bust the room door open on my ass? Why would I think you would be out there making noises instead of busting the room door open on me? Does that even make sense? Furthermore, why would I be so stupid as to be, God forbid again, doing something in there and then text you and alert you to what I'm doing? I'm not dumb. Let's not insult my intelligence. I'm not trying to sound cocky, but I graduated magna cum laude and I have a high IQ. It's not the highest, but I do have a high IQ. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to sit there and rat on myself. This is similar to the Walmart situation that I talked about in my full story that led to them throwing the thief stimuli at me because I was relating that situation to what happened to my roommate. Again, it wasn't that I stole, but it was this, again, situation that happened in my early 20s that created this weird monitoring like thing. That was the first monitoring experience I ever had, aside from what happened to me years later in that Airbnb, that first long-term Airbnb. You have to listen to my full story to hear the story, y'all. I'm not going to tell it again. But that happened to me and I hadn't done anything. And it was reminiscent of something that had happened to my roommate where she had done something. And I talked about it in my full story and they felt like I was wrong for mentioning that. I never said who my roommate was. I was more so just trying to explain why I felt like something spiritual was at play. But I was wrong. I acknowledge I should have never mentioned that. Whether I mentioned who she was or not, I should have never mentioned her personal business, because I don't know if she even did anything to me spiritually. And if she didn't, then I was wrong from even, that's crazy. And I can acknowledge that too, right? So that's another moment where they're kind of saying like I bared false witness, although I never outright accused her. It was another insinuation. So it was three things, where I made insinuations. It was that thing with the roommate where I kind of insinuated that she might have done something spiritual to me that led to all these crazy things since my early 20s. The text messages sent to my parents. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say who. To the people in my close circle. Kind of insinuating that they might have been doing to me what I had just experienced for half a year in 3 Airbnbs in Florida. And then the initial time I actually truly did bear false witness, it wasn't an insinuation, where I accused that guy, the cyberstalking, cyberbullying guy. I don't even want to talk about that. Let's just fast forward past that. The 3 times where you could say, bared false witness. One, I actually technically did bear false witness. And then the other 2, I made insinuations. And so that's what's led to them throwing all these heinous accusations at me, not just the child thing, many accusations, many, y'all. If you listen to my prior videos, you'll hear what I'm talking about. And it's like the spiteful vigilante thing, because they think I'm somebody that bears false witness, and they also think that I'm a bully. And it's not that. It's really just a series of unfortunate events and me being misunderstood. That's really what it is. Anyway, y'all, so after I sent the text message, basically just kind of like insinuating that they were doing to me what was happening to me in the Airbnbs, it created this horrible situation for me. And it turned into this thing with my nieces and, this nightmare thing. And it wasn't as bad before I tried to leave violin. I was still teaching. I became a teacher. I taught down here for 2 years. I was a substitute, I was an English teacher for 2 years here on island. And I was working security, so even though the targeting had started, it wasn't what it became after I tried to relocate. And I had some of the reactions I had. And I said some of the offensive things I said that led to the thing going viral. When I left in 2022, the thing followed me and I realized it followed me. I had some of those horrible reactions, said the offensive things I said. The targeting went viral, went buku crazy. I experienced some of the crazy ass shit I experienced in the States. Y'all got to listen to my story. There's another link in the description box, y'all. It's titled Part 1, Gaslighting and Programming of the Targeted Individual. In that video, you guys will hear vivid details about what happened to me when I tried to relocate off island in 2022. And some of the offensive things I shared and how it was a reaction and why I shared what I shared and what I experienced in the mainland. The targeting was much worse than here on island. Listen to that video, y'all, because, that video will explain a lot. The things that I said is used to turn targets against me often, right? And then targets hear my videos and they come back around when they hear my story. So understand, I've said this many times. I apologize if anything that I said in any video that you see recording of me offended you. I don't stand by any of the things I shared. It was coming from an angry place. I was being reactive abuse. And again, as I referenced earlier, the analogy I gave you, throwing a stone and busting someone's head when they punch me in the mouth. That's pretty much what it was. I wouldn't even use that analogy there, though, because they were busting my head up there. With the things they were doing to me, they were busting my head up there. So it was kind of equal, like bust head, is what I would call it, with the things I shared in Florida. It was horrible. It was terrible. What they were doing to me was horrible and terrible. I don't justify it. I don't stand by it. I apologize for what I said, but it was bust head for bust head up there. It wasn't like the other instances. Like, for instance, in the past, the first initial time where I said offensive stuff to the cyberstalker, cyberbullying situation, where, a simple meme was sent to me and then I went ham. It wasn't like that. This situation in Florida was whoa. What I was going through, it was whoa. And so that's what happened. So please listen to that video, y'all. And you'll hear about some of the offensive Hebrew Israelite propaganda I shared and some of the other offensive things that I said that led to my targeting going viral and ultimately led to me getting neuromonitored. And what led to now this video I'm creating now where I'm talking about brain ticks because I'm constantly being programmed and sensitized to stimuli with their shadow networking software where they're constantly sending me things to sensitize me, right? Through these videos, everything I watch, every movie, they have the technology to change videos in real time, y'all. I showed y'all several videos. Hold on, over here. Check out this part, for example, of the shadow networking AI software used on targets. And you'll see me showing you how they can change videos in real time. Even this video, my part 3 video, part 3 example of shadow networking AI software used on targets. You can tell they changed that video as well. So it's not just that they're using like this AI software to send you videos with stimuli in it to sensitize you, but they have the technology to actually change live recordings and pictures. It's crazy, y'all. Check out my pertinent information about the targeted individual video link. That's in the description box and comment section. I go into detail about the shadow networking software and how it works. So check that video out as well, y'all. Anyway, let me get into what this video is about today, y'all. This always happens. Always. I'll come on here, wanting to talk about one thing. And because I feel like I need to give a little bit of a backdrop to kind of explain what I'm going to say, I end up talking for hours and hours. It always happens. I can intend to talk for 30 minutes and the video will be 2 hours. It's inevitable. And it's kind of a bad habit too, because I just like to make sure that you understand where I'm coming from. So it's like I feel like I need to give this little backdrop story before I segue into what I'm going to be talking about, because I wanted you to understand, first of all, that I'm innocent. I didn't do anything. And this thing started simply because of an Airbnb situation where I had an OCD that was taken out of context that led to PTSD and led to this trickle effect. The bird is out there going ham, y'all. The rooster drone. Anyway, it just led to this trickle effect, y'all. That basically culminated in me becoming a targeted individual, basically. Anyway, so let's talk about what happened today. Because I went off on a major tangent, but not complete. Remember, I told y'all this already. Even when I go off on tangents and I run my mouth, it's always relative to what I'm going to be talking about. It's never just random ass unconnected tangents. It's always connected. And it's always relative to what I'm going to be talking about. I need to blow my nose, y'all. And unfortunately, I said this already in my recent videos. I'm glad to have a new phone. I have an iPhone now, but unfortunately, I don't have access to the recorder app I had on my Android. And the recorder app that I have on this phone sucks. I can't pause it. On my Android, I could pause the video, come back and you wouldn't even know that I paused it. You just hear like a little 1 second pause, and I could go off and blow my nose or whatever I needed to do. With this app, it's like if I need to go off and blow my nose, y'all are just going to have to wait while I go blow my nose. It's crazy. Anyways, y'all, I'm going to blow my nose real quick. I'm not even going to walk off. You're going to, I do apologize. You're going to hear me. This is the real me. Uncut, candid. I'm very real with my subscribers. You're going to hear me blow my nose now, y'all. I'm sorry. I'll do it very quickly. Anyways, y'all, let's talk about what happened today now. Let me get into what this video is about, because this video, man, super long. So anyways, what happens too with the sensitization and them constantly sending you whatever stimuli it is to sensitize you. So whether it be things about stealing, bullying, whatever it is, it's programming. If constantly there's stuff in this thing down your brain, and down your throat, and into your brain, no matter what you put on, you play in pool, they're playing against you with an avatar that contains the name they're sensitizing you to, or the name of whatever it is. So let's say it's stealing. They're constantly playing against you with avatars that says thief or burglar. You see pictures of thieves as the avatar in pool. Then you hop over to Facebook, and every ad is about theft and security and then you hop over to YouTube, and then you're recommended to constantly sending you videos about stealing. What do you think is happening to your brain? You're getting programmed. It's just like an ad. I keep saying this redundantly, y'all, because I want you to understand it's real. It's real. It's programming, right? They call it MK Ultra. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. I'm not trying to get in problems. I don't want to get into too many problems. And I'm not even supposed to really be making this video. The correction officer job is still pending. And now I just recently spoke with the lady for HR, and she was telling me that they're still doing the background check. So I'm scared. I thought that was done already. I thought I was just going through the agility test. So I'm taking that as a warning that I need to be careful with the things I'm saying. I want to make sure I get that job. I did so much to get that job. I have been working diligently I really want to get that job. I am not trying to jeopardize it. But at the same time, I have to defend myself when things like my brain ticking happens, and then I hear certain conversation with innuendo in it, like possibly because of the brain ticking. I have to advocate for myself. I can't sit there and let that just rock because I know how the program works and I know what happened to me last year. I have to advocate for myself. So I'm doing it carefully, and I'm not saying anything offensive, and I'm not saying anything off cap. Anyway, so it's programming, y'all. When they're constantly stuffing whatever it is they're sensitizing you to into your head 24/7, it's programming. It's just like when you're watching a movie and a Coca-Cola ad comes on, right? Or a McDonald's ad comes on. And then all of a sudden you watching a movie and Coke is popping in your head. And you don't even realize that you just got programmed. You're not realizing, hey, that's popping in my head because I just saw a Coke ad 30 minutes ago. You just know that Coke is popping in your head. It's similar to what happens when they sensitize you with the shadow networking software. It's way more invasive. It's not just a 30-second ad that happens or pops up on the screen while you're watching a movie. It's in everything you watch. You go on YouTube again. They're sending it to you in your recommended videos. You go to play pool. They're playing against you with avatars that contains the stimuli. You go on Facebook. They're showing you ads that contains the stimuli. You go out in person. They're presenting stimuli in person sometimes. It's programming 24/7 nonstop. And what happens is when you're aware of the fact that your brain is being neuromonitored, and you're aware of the fact that your thoughts are being projected and everyone around you can hear your thoughts, and that you're constantly being programmed and sensitized to things, that thing can pop into your head easy. And then you could get gaslit about it, because then they might start doing conversation around you because they heard your thought, and it's just programming. It's not your fault. It's programming. But I already realized I'm not stupid. They keep trying to, they contradict themselves all the time with this thing, man. One minute they're sending me stuff like I'm intelligent and I'm conniving and I'm calculating. And then the next minute they're sending me stuff like I'm stupid. And I think what they're trying to insinuate is that I'm not catching on, that they're doing it on purpose and I don't need to keep making the videos. I'm catching on. I peep game. But at the same time, I know what I went through last year. And so for my safety and my protection, I will still keep making the videos every time something happens. I'm not going to say anything disrespectful. I'm just defending myself and breaking it down for my own protection, because I know what I experienced last year. I'm not stupid, trust me. Anyway, so anyways, y'all. So today now the programming started kicking in, or what I call the brain tick, because I saw stimuli, right? So they let me catch a ride today. Remember, if you check out my parts 1, 2, and 3 episode in the gym and dating while targeted videos, you'll hear me talk about what started happening with the transportation here on island. I don't have a car at the moment. I'm saving up to get one, and I actually just ordered an electric scooter. So I'm going to be able to get from point A to point B. I'm excited. I have transportation that's coming until I can save for a car. Thank the Most High, right? But in the meantime, what I've been doing is catching bus, and I've been catching taxi. If you listen to my parts 1, 2, and 3 episode in the gym and dating while targeted, you'll hear how they kind of shut down the public transportation system on me because of brain ticking. So what happened was, if you listen to those videos, I'm not going to redundantly repeat that. I don't want this video to be too long. But similar to what happened today, brain ticking, where stuff is popping in my head because of sensitization and because of stimuli being presented, right? In those episodes, what happened is I was in the gym working out, doing my thing. I wasn't having an issue. And sometimes I do suspect they send people in the gym for me. I don't know when it's being done for sure or not. I do strongly suspect it's happened. Not all the time, but I do suspect it happens. And so that does often cause my brain to tick, but not always. I just recently, if you check out my last video that I posted, I think it was the last video or the one before that, I was talking about the guy that they sent in there that I talked about in one of my prior videos when I tried to become an auxiliary officer here on island in 2021. And I told you I had went through all the process, the steps. I had taken the agility test. I had taken the psychological evaluation. I was even told I had the job. They had done the background check already, but then it was like ultra screening. And I think that guy is like the last step, and he's around my age. And so I remember having to go through him, and I remembered his attitude just seeming different to the other officers I had dealt with. And I don't mean anything disrespectful, like I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I don't even know him like that, and if he does have some sort of preconceived notion of who he thinks I am, that is my fault, because I did say offensive things in the past. And I've acknowledged that. So maybe he just has the wrong idea like everyone else. But nonetheless, I do think, I don't know for sure, and I don't want to bear false witness, I did think that he knew who I was. It just seemed that way, because off rip, it seemed like he had an attitude with me. I remembered even showing my sisters the messages between him and I, because I was like, why is he talking to me like this? I kind of knew from dealing with that situation. I don't want to talk about it again, but it's just like, I just briefly need to mention it. That cyber situation, I always knew when someone, I'm intuitive. I could always tell when someone was familiar with the situation. And most of the dudes in my age range, and I want to say like about a decade or older, knew about that situation. Even younger, I even dated younger, and I could tell the guy that was younger than me knew too. So it was this thing, right, where it was like on island, I had this notorious rep before being targeted because of that cyber stalking situation. Again, if you're new to my channel, you got to check out my other videos to know what I'm talking about. It was this thing with the guys on island where most of them knew about me, and not in a good way either. So I just kind of felt like he knew who I was. I didn't know for certain, but it was just the way he was talking to me and stuff. I said that I even showed my sisters the conversation, because it's like, oh my God, why is he talking to me like this? I was like, I know I'm not going crazy. So I'm even showing them the messages, like, what? And my older sister was telling me, well, maybe he's having a bad week. She's like, I doubt he knows who you are, Reefy. She's like, he's probably just having a bad week or whatever. I'm like, girl, I think I'm telling you, girl, I think he knows who I am. I remember telling her that. Anyway, so I didn't get the job, even after being told I had gotten it, I didn't get it. And so, he basically, I don't want to talk about too much because I could get myself in problems, but, again, that was why I feel like they might have sent him to the gym for me. I don't know. And I don't want to bear false witness. Maybe it's a coincidence, but there was another officer too. Both of them are police officers. There's another officer that dated my older sister. I don't want to say dated. Let me use that term loosely. They went on like 1 or 2 dates years ago when we were younger, in our early 20s, right? Actually, I think my sister was a teen at the time. I don't even think she was in her 20s yet. If she was in her 20s, it was like 21, 22, where she went on like a date or two with this guy that was an officer. And my younger sister and I, last year, mentioned him very briefly. We were just talking about the guys that my older sister dated when we were younger. We were just talking about back in the day, man, the dudes we used to date and stuff. And the fact that my older sister had a lot of guys that liked her back in the day, right? And she used to, not like guys for simple reasons, and how we're all picky in our own weird way, right? And so we were talking about the fact that, I was just saying he was a good catch, and she didn't even like him because his personality didn't match with hers. It wasn't anything, negative about him. Nothing at all. Good. I don't know him. I can't say good dude. I don't know him. But he seemed like a good catch. It was really just that he was too reserved for what my sister likes. Like, she likes reserved guys, but like, it's different. It's like she likes ambivert guys, and maybe he is that, and maybe just in that moment he was shy or something. But that interaction that they had was just like, he was like too reserved for what she likes. And so I do remember just briefly talking about that last year with my younger sister. We briefly mentioned him and a bunch of other guys that my older sister dated. I noticed I start going to the gym, I'm seeing him. My memory is so good that, I want to say the second or third time when I noticed him in the gym, I realized why he kept looking familiar. And I kept noticing he was looking at me, and I kept saying, who is this person? I'm like, he looks familiar, and I keep seeing him looking at me. I'm like, something's going on. I know this person, and I can't put I couldn't figure it out until the third time. The name literally popped in my head. I said, oh my God, so-and-so. And then once that happened, I started to get basity, and I explained to y'all what basity means, and the name just wouldn't stop popping in my head. I was like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. And it really shouldn't be, because it's understandable why that's happening. But remember, my thoughts are being projected. And so I remember when the name kept popping in my head, I was like, I started putting two together, and I was like, oh my God, and he's a cop too. So I'm like, not only, do I think they sent him because possibly sent him, I don't want to bear false witness, because we mentioned him, but also too, I know I'm being monitored. So, did they purposely send this officer to monitor me because of the things I said? I'm like, oh God, here we go. I just remember ticking like crazy. Anyway, going off on a tangent. So then now recently, I want to say like within the last 2 weeks, it's been about 3 times now, I noticed I saw that officer, the other one, not the one that my older sister dated or went on one date with, 2 dates. The other one that I talked about in that video where I was talking about the auxiliary officer position and me not getting it because of him and his screening and what I presume to have been a preconceived notion of me that might have played a factor in his decision because of the way he was interacting with me. It really seemed like he knew who I was, but I don't want to bear false witness. I don't know. It's the reason he gave me to, it was about a job from a decade ago when I had worked so many other jobs since then, all of that. I didn't argue with him, but I definitely in my heart of hearts felt like, wow, what if it's, I was right? What if he really knew who I was? And this is what, because before he even told me I wasn't getting the job, I had already shown my sisters the messages between him and I and the attitude it seemed like he had. He wasn't nasty. He wasn't nasty towards me. It was just like this attitude, this underlying attitude that I picked up on. And the way he was writing, it was just really curt and almost borderline rude, but very curt. And it just seemed like, I was like, oh my God, he's snippy. I was like, let me show my sisters. I showed them. I was like, y'all, I didn't think it would stop me from getting the job. I never guessed I was going to actually be stopped from getting the job. I didn't think so. So anyways, so I talked about that in detail in a video from last year. So him showing up in the gym, if they are sending him, which I suspect, but I'm not accusing, if they are sending him, I understand that. I get that part. I understand that because I did talk about him in a video. The other guy, like for my sister, I don't really I still to this day, I don't understand it. We briefly mentioned him. I didn't say nothing bad about him. So I didn't really understand why they would be sending him to sensitize me. I didn't understand that one. But anyways, this is what I suspect. I suspect those two were sent for me. And I do suspect there are a few other people in there that they stationed in there. I don't know for sure. So I'm not going to bear false witness. Again, I reiterate, I suspect that there are a few other people that they stationed in there, sometimes females. I explained to y'all in a recent video what happened with that Spanish girl, right? That confirmed my suspicions, right? And that's another thing. They like to sensitize me to Hispanic girls. It's this weird thing they're doing. I don't want to go on, these are all things I've talked about in my prior videos, y'all. It's this thing they created because of what I said about the guy from high school that quote unquote broke my heart, or was my first, it wasn't first love, it was puppy love, but my first love like feeling, right? Because of what I said about him. They try to sensitize me to Spanish girls when I never specified Spanish. I think they did their research and realized he married someone Hispanic. And so I think that's why they try to sensitize me to that. But I never specified Spanish. I never said that. And actually, when we were in high school and he was saying what I would term as ignorant comments, he wasn't saying Spanish. He was more so talking about lighter skin, like colorism, like African American females. He wanted lighter skinned black girls. Like even the girl that he dated, I remember he dated another girl that was like a lighter skinned black girl. But what's crazy is after him and I stopped talking, he did date a dark skinned black girl, right? So it was just this thing with him. And I'm not upset with him for it. I keep trying to explain to them, this was high school. I was young and impressionable. This was what I thought was my first love, right? And so imagine you fall for somebody, because him and I were best friends, right? In person, best friends, like classes together, everything. We talked for about 2 to 3 years on the phone. At night, he's calling me, staying on the phone with me all night long, right? I thought I was in love. This was just a friend. I thought I was in love. It was high school. You know how that is when you have that first love-like emotion and feeling. And so he used to do weird things where I felt like he liked me too. Like I remember, for instance, when I went to driving school, as soon as I got into driving school, I told him I was in driving school. The next day he's in driving school too. So he's in the class with me. Little simple things like that. Or he wanted me to go to Sunny House to meet his mom. So I was like, does he like me? I'm like, and he's telling me weird stuff too on the phone. Like, and so it's like he used to play with my head. And I don't know if maybe because I think he liked me, but he was embarrassed about it. That's what I think. I'm just keeping it real. I don't know for sure. I really don't. I wasn't in his head, but this is what was happening in high school. And I remembered it being this tumultuous thing for me because it was my first love-like experience. And I was not sure about it. It was unstable. He used to make comments about darker skinned females, right? So it seemed like he had an aversion to darker skin. And I'm not light skin. I'm not dark skin either. I'm brown skin. And I love my brown skin. But what I'm saying is it did build an insecurity in me. Because imagine falling so deep for somebody, right? And it was puppy love. But at the time, I didn't know that. Falling so deep for somebody and not being sure if you're what they like. Not being sure if you're that aesthetic. And so that's what it was. That was the problem for me. It wasn't his preference. If his preference was lighter skin, then that's you, right? I can't be mad at you for that. I have a preference too. They tried to get on me and say I was vain. because I said I don't like shorter men. That's just a preference. You can't get mad at somebody for a preference. I'm never going to be mad at you if you tell me you like lighter skinned women or Hispanic women like they keep trying to sensitize me to. I'm never going to be mad at you for that. Where I was uncomfortable with him was because he used to make negative comments about what wasn't his preference, about darker skinned women. And that was where I became uncomfortable. And that was where the insecurity in me built back then, not now. And so they keep trying to sensitize me to that. And that was years ago. That was high school. I'm 32 now. You know, that's crazy. I actually spoke to him recently. He wrote me on Facebook recently, just like a friend thing. You know, him and I don't even talk anymore. It was just this like, hey, how you doing type thing, because he saw me floating in his mutual friends. And there's nothing there. There's no feeling there other than like, oh, old friend. Hey, wow, I haven't heard from you in a while. It wasn't that butterfly feeling like what I used to get. And so that's what I'm trying to explain. It's not a now thing. This was back in high school. I was just telling them my story and I was being very real with them. And they took everything I said and they created ammo and created these weird scenarios and situations from the things I said. It's crazy. And they have like a PhD in misconstruing the things that I say. And somehow it turned and morphed into them sensitizing me to Hispanic women when I never mentioned Hispanic women, not once. Never. And so what I think is, I think they did the research. I think they know who I'm talking about. And I think they saw that he married a Spanish girl. And so I think that's why they're trying to sensitize me to Hispanic women. It's stupid. Like, I don't even feel that way about that guy anymore. I still care for him as a friend. That's a friend from back in the day. I would never want to see something bad happen to him. But those butterflies aren't there anymore. I don't have those feelings anymore. So that insecurity is no longer there either. I'm just trying to explain in my story what was going on with me in high school. High school. I'm 32 now. Okay. Big grown woman. Anyway, so, and he wasn't a bad person either. You know, I keep making sure to say that, you know, because it would sound ignorant. Why would you like a guy that's saying negative things about, you know, it wasn't like that. I would call that a character flaw, not his preference, his aversion to what seemed like darker skin. I would call that a character flaw, or what I used to call it was ignorance. But I think it was just a character flaw. I don't think he has a problem or is a bad person for having a preference for a certain type of female. That's allowed. Everybody has a certain attraction to certain things, just like how I have a preference for taller men. I'll never be mad at him for that. The only thing I had a problem with back then was his aversion to dark skin and the way some of the things he used to say used to make me uncomfortable. But even with that, he was such a good person, really humble, really down to earth, really nice guy. That's why I liked him. That's why I fell for him. God-fearing, all of that. That was what I liked about him. He was a good person, aside from what I called a character flaw. Anyway, so they created this thing, boy, where they're sensitizing me to Spanish women. And that's now something, too, that's stimuli for me. That makes my brain tick sometimes. So all of this was happening today. So let me explain to you what happened today, right? So, all right, so let me tell y'all what happened. So anyways, I told y'all they had shut down the bus system on me. If you check out, like I just referenced a little while ago, because I'm kind of now starting to hop all over the place and I want to end the video. It's getting too long. If you check out my parts 1, 2, and 3, gym episode and dating while targeted videos, you'll hear me give you examples of why, not examples, you'll hear me explain what happened when they started shutting down the public transportation, the taxis, the Vitran, etc., right? It started in the gym, sensitization. This is how I went off on the tangent, because I was telling y'all I suspect that they send people in the gym for me, and sometimes Spanish girls. This is what I was saying. And there was this one instance with this one Spanish girl. I don't see her anymore after I talked about it in that video, where they, you know, it seems like they sent her in there, because I noticed the first day I noticed her, you know, I noticed her, she kept watching me. I'm very cognizant, even though I'm not watching you. Right? I might not watch you directly. I'm always in my peripheral looking at my surrounding, because I know how it works when you're targeted. And I know that people are sometimes sent to monitor targets often, not sometimes, often, right? And I know what I had already experienced in the gym, right? With certain things that I suspect was going on. I'm not 100%, right? So even if I'm not watching a person directly, trust and believe I'm always watching with the peripheral. I'm seeing everything always. And so I always notice new things too, and new faces. I always do. Whether it's somebody innocently there or not, of course there's going to be innocent new faces that aren't sent there for me. I'm not that convoluted and conceited and pig-headed and pompous to think that every face in the gym is there for me. Of course not. But I do believe I suspect that they send some people in there for me, right? And so this Spanish girl that I started seeing in there, I strongly suspected that was the case, because I remember I went into the back room, right? And it was just there working out. I noticed I seen her watching me. I was seeing it. You know, I'd be seeing it with my peripheral, because I'm always keeping an eye for the new faces to see, is this somebody they sent for me? Possibly. You know, I'd be paying attention, right? So I noticed she was watching me. I was like, okay, I wonder if they sent this girl for me. I'm like, let me not bear false witness. I don't know. Could just be a new face. This is a very nice gym. It's in the cut. I already explained to y'all. He has a lot of equipment. The owner's nice. He's funny, you know, personable, gregarious. I'm like, this is a gem, right? So people are going to come through. So it might just be a new person coming through, right? This is what I'm thinking in my head. But I'm like, I don't know. I'm seeing her watching me, but it could just be because I'm target. A lot of people watch me very boldly, right? It could just be because I'm the target and they all know who I am. But I'm like, let me not make a thing of it, right? So that first time I just ignored her, right? Even though I was noticing her, she kept doing it. I kept seeing her watch. I kept seeing it, right? I know that I always know. I'm intuitive, y'all. I know. Yeah, not to use that stimuli. I can often tell when it's something that was likely sent, right? So anyways, I'm in there and I worked out that time. I talked about, I don't even remember which video I talked about it in. What happened with her. I'm trying to look for that video where I talked about it. Damn, what video was it where I talked about her? I've had several videos since then. Damn, I don't know. It was definitely after the gym episode videos. So any one of these videos after. So it could be this part 1 targeted individual reactive abuse video or any of the videos after where I talked about her. Obviously, it's not going to be my poem, Lisa Leslie. And it's not in that part, for example, of shadow AI networking or that mind reading video or that discussion of, you know, as a matter of fact, so it would have been before then. So it's one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 videos, y'all, where I talked about her. It was either the part 1 targeted individual reactive abuse documentation, that video with me with the glasses, or any one of those videos in between, all the way up to the part 2 targeted individual reactive abuse documentation, the other video with the glasses. Any one of those 5 videos is where I talked about that encounter with that girl. I don't remember which one, but they stopped sending her after they did what they did, right? And when I say they did what they did, this is why I'm saying I strongly suspect they sent her. The second time I went in the gym with her, right? I noticed again, I kept noticing the eye thing that they just do, right? I was noticing it even though I'm not looking at you, I'm seeing you, trust me. But I'm ignoring it because I'm like, okay, maybe again, this is just somebody they sent in and because I'm target, she's just watching me. Maybe that's what's going on, right? I notice all of a sudden I sit down at the extension machine, leg extension machine, and similar to what happened with these other 3 girls, right, that I also documented before in one of my prior videos, I can't remember which one, right? I also suspect those girls were sent in there too, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I sat down on the extension machine. I noticed that she goes over right as I sit down to the machine that was right next to me. So I'm like, okay, well, that's whatever. I'm going to just ignore that. You know, maybe it's just a coincidence, a coinky dink. Although I did notice her keep watching me. I know what I was seeing. So when I start doing the leg extensions, the mosquito starts flying in my face, I guess because I didn't start to tick. Remember I told you when certain stimuli is presented, remember I told you sometimes they'll put girls around me, right? When certain stimuli is presented, my brain will start to tick. I think because my brain didn't tick in that moment, they decided to try and egg the reaction out of me. Now, this is not bearing false witness. This really happened. So I'm doing the leg extensions and my brain didn't tick. They start to fly the mosquito all in my face because she's bending over, right? She's standing by the machine. She kept bending over and doing something with her foot, right? And I'm just there doing my leg extensions, ignoring it. They start to fly the mosquito in my face like crazy because I didn't react. Flying it all in my face. I'm like, what? I said, are y'all serious? I said, so you didn't get the reaction, so you fly the mosquito in my face. This is how it felt. I'm not trying to make problems. I do not want to jeopardize that job. I'm advocating for me and telling y'all. This is why I suspect they'd be sending people in the gym for me. I'm not trying to say anything disrespectful or rude, and I do not want problems. I even just heard an ambulance just now. I'm just documenting y'all and advocating for myself. They start flying the mosquito drone all in my face, y'all, like crazy. I said, are y'all serious? I thought this in my head. I didn't say it out loud because at this point now, they know that I know that they're listening to my thoughts. So at this point, if I want to have a conversation with them in my head, I can. And I do sometimes. And so I was sitting there like, are y'all serious? I said, I knew she was here for me. I said, I knew it. I thought that in my head. I said, I knew it. I said, but I didn't want to bear false witness. I said, now you didn't get the reaction you wanted the first time. You didn't get it the second time. Now you flying the mosquito in my face to get the reaction because I knew she was off over there, right? And I wasn't paying attention to her like that, but I was just keeping cognizant of the proximity, right? But it was when the thing started flying in my face, that's when I looked over and I noticed she's bending and doing all this. I was like, oh my God. I said, y'all really trying to create something. Because if you watch this video, y'all, that says sharing stimuli used to sensitize me, chosen ones, and you'll see the big muscular man bent over. That was another thing they sent to me in my recommended, by the way, y'all, to sensitize me. Please check that video out. They really tried hard not to let me post that video, y'all. And when I say they, it's not, I'm referring to different people. There's a lot of people involved in my targeting. And when I say they, I'm talking about the people that's controlling the shadow networking, which I believe is being done in a fusion center in the mainland. I'm not certain. Anyways, that's something they tried to sensitize me to and create because of a reaction I had from PTSD and trauma, right? I broke it down very, very vividly in that video, what happened in that moment, right? And they tried so hard to stop me from posting that video. Twice they deleted the video. The third time I was finally able to post it, they struck it down and said that it was a vaccine thing. Like I was talking about vaccines. Not once did I mention vaccines. And if you listen to that video, you'll hear me bust that stimuli down. And it totally eradicates it. And so that's why I think they tried so hard to stop me from posting the video, because they think I'm this bully bitch that deserves what's happening to me. And so it's like whenever I'm able to advocate and clear my name, it becomes a problem. And I notice I get trouble with the technology, the video's getting struck down for a bogus reason, etc., etc. But understand the bend over thing is something that they tried to sensitize me to that I bust down. And so sometimes gang stalkers will bend over, right, to sensitize me. So she was doing that, right? And she wasn't doing it initially either. It was after the mosquito flew in my face, right? And then I started to say, you really trying to create something? And then I looked over at her, all of a sudden she's bending down, doing this bend down thing. So I'm like, oh my God, I said, I knew it. I'm intuitive. I can feel things, man. I can feel people's intentions. And I could even see her from my peripheral watching me. You know, and so now that I'm saying this, I'm sure anyone else, if they do send people in there for me, I don't want to bear false witness. I'm sure now they're going to not be watching me. It's either they're going to purposely now not watch me, or they're going to watch me extra now to prove a point. You know, it's one or the other that happens when I mention these things, y'all. Even if it's really happening, that's what happens. Anyway, so whatever. Hopefully it'll just be normal, because things have been pretty decent recently. Today was a good day in the gym. My brain was ticking, but it was a good day. It wasn't anything that anyone did specifically. It was really, well, they did play against me with stimuli that created one of the ticks that was happening. But other than that, the other ticking that was happening, it wasn't anything that anyone did. It was more so just the programming and sensitization. So anyways, so that happened with that girl. So I believe they'd be sending girls in the gym. I suspect, I'm not bearing false witness. I suspect that sometimes they're sending girls in there too, not just men, but I suspect they send both in different ways, right? I think they'd be having undercover cops go in, but there's like a kill two birds with one stone thing where it will also be a guy that's stimuli. Like for instance, that cop that dated my sister once or twice that I mentioned last year briefly, or the auxiliary officer job cop, right, that I mentioned in one of my videos. You know, that kind of way where it's like a double killing two birds with one stone. I guess the cop is sent there to monitor me, but then also to sensitize me because I mentioned them, right? So there's several people in there that I strongly suspect, I'm not going to bear false witness, I could be wrong, that I strongly suspect. I could just tell from the antics and different things like that. I can typically tell when it was likely someone sent in there for me. I don't always know for sure, but I've always been able to trust my intuition. I'm pretty intuitive, right? It's to the point where it's too strong, where sometimes I might overfeel, you know, and then that's what leads to me making accusations. And this is why I'm trying to be very careful. But typically my senses are spot on. I'm very intuitive. I'm telling you, it's like a sixth sense. Not to use that word. Oh my God. I don't want to use that word. That's literally what it's called. You know, they sensitize me to that. That's literally what it's called though. Like that extra sense where you can feel like others. It's called being an empath or being intuitive. And I am that. I've always been. Anyway, so, so today my brain was ticking like crazy, y'all. It started with them giving me the ride. They let me get a ride today. You know, I went to catch taxi and right away I got the taxi. I was so grateful. But what happens is when something like that happens to you, where the public transportation is shut down and, you know, your thoughts are being projected, you start to feel this paranoid feeling like, what if something pops in my head that's going to make them shut it down again? Like that's what started happening to me while I was sitting on that bus, right? So I'm sitting there already. When I'm sitting around people, my brain starts ticking. I explained this to y'all already. When I go around people, it doesn't matter who it is, female, male, child, cat, dog, at this point, anything makes my brain tick at this point. And I know they've seen it too, even around family, right? My brain ticks, especially if I know the person's name. It's a nightmare. I keep saying I don't even want to know people's names anymore. It's a nightmare when I see somebody that I know, because that name wants to start popping in my head. I'm like, oh my God, that's weird. Now the person's going to hear their name. It's this weird thing with this program, man. It's so embarrassing and humiliating what happens. I'm like, oh my God, now this person's going to hear their name popping in my head. I'm like, great. Not good. Another word they've sensitized me to. But really, I'm just like, oh my goodness. It's like a nightmare when I see people I know. Not anything personal to them. It's just a me thing now because my thoughts are being projected. I'm like, oh my God, what if their name starts popping in my head? And so that's a nightmare too. But that's what starts happening when I'm around people. I already explained this in several of my other videos. It's psychological. They do also have the technology to push thoughts into your head. So I do believe that there's an element of thought manipulation sometimes that happens to targets, but I've been very clear about the fact that I think that's probably like a 10 to 15% thing. I think 90 to 85% of the time it's just psychological. It's just the fact that you're being sensitized to certain things and that everyone around you can hear your thoughts. So there's this angst that what if the thing that they've sensitized you to pops in your head, and then it starts popping in your head and you can't control it. It's this weird thing and I can't really explain it more than what I am. And if you haven't felt it, you can't empathize. You could sympathize if you're a sympathetic person, but you might be able to sympathize if you're a sympathetic person, but you can't really understand how this feels unless you experience it. It's a nightmare, y'all. So anyways, that's often why I'm rushing. A lot of people say, slow down. Like the guy in the gym, the owner, he has this joke with me that I'm always on go. Like I'm super fast. Like, the other day my mom dropped me off to the gym and she sped off because I asked her something she didn't like. And so he said, oh my God, he said, is it a family thing? Because he's like always talking to me about the fact that I'm always speeding and on the go. And it's like, I don't, I'm always going super fast. I was trying to explain to him, no, she's just, speeding off because she didn't like something I said to her. But I was like, it's just a thing now with my targeting because I'm so afraid that my brain is going to tick and struppiness is going to pop in my brain. And that's just island slang, y'all. Struppiness is stupidness, nonsense, embarrassment. That I'm trying to rush through any interaction. Even when I go to the grocery store, I'm trying to rush through before something pops in my head. I'm so used to them revving by 2 when the tick starts. I'm trying to rush through before the tick starts, And so I had to kind of train myself to slow down and understand that, okay, well, if your brain ticks, it's not your fault. This is a very invasive, intense thing you're going through, whatever. Get through the interaction. And so I've been having to force myself to slow down and just let it happen. And it's made it easier for me. Anyway, so that's what happens. My brain starts ticking, especially when I'm in a bus full of people and I'm kind of like stuck in that moment where I'm getting the ride. And so it's not like I could rush off. I have to sit there until I get to my destination. I'm fighting like heck to stop the ticking from happening. So that was happening on the bus today. And so I decided to play my golf game. And they're going to play against me on the golf game with the last name of my nieces, the last name of my sister and my brother-in-law. I'm not going to say the last name. Let's just say that the last name is Brown. That's not the last name, but I'm just using a filler last name. So I don't use the real last name. They're going to play against me with an avatar that says Brown's Army. So automatically, obviously, I know that it's, again, insinuating that thing about the text. Again, it's just to spite me. But it caused my brain to tick. It's sensitization. So immediately my brain starts ticking, right? And immediately that name, the name of the niece that was staying in the room with me, that pops in my head sometimes when certain stimuli is presented that they've sensitized and programmed my brain to, it started popping in my head. I couldn't stop it. I'm just fighting like heck to stop the thing from popping. It's just popping in. I'm like, oh my God, I said I'm not going to gaslight myself. So I thought, because I know they heard my thoughts, I said, look at the screen. I said, I know y'all see the last name. Y'all know that that's my brother-in-law's last name. I said, that's why it's popping in my head. I thought that in my head. Because that's the beauty of it. I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons, right? You can listen to my thoughts, right? So I'm going to use it to talk to you when you're doing struppiness, right? So I said, y'all see the last name on the screen. I said, that's my brother-in-law's last name. That is why the name is popping in my head, right? So I get off the bus. I thanked the man. I was very polite. I gave him the money. I was so grateful he stopped and gave me a ride, because again, I told y'all what's been happening with the bus system. And I walked to the gym. Right? So I got to the gym, my brain is on go because of that moment. The angst of the ride, the angst of them possibly shutting the ride system down again. Even though my scooter's coming, it will be here in 2 weeks. I still have 2 weeks where I need to work out and I need to catch a ride. And so I'm just like, it's this angst where they open up this thing that was shut down and I'm so excited and I'm like, I don't want to ruin it. And I'm like, oh my God, brain, don't tick and mess it up. That's all I'm thinking while I'm on the bus. Please don't tick and mess this up for me. And then they play against me with that stimuli. And then, that name starts popping in my head. I'm like, God. I'm like, really? Right? So I'm just like explaining to them in my head, as crazy as this is, because they're listening to my thoughts. I said, look at the screen. I said, I know you know why that happened. And when I get off the bus and my brain is ticking like crazy after that. You know, it's like I could not catch myself after that moment. So I'm walking, my brain is ticking, I'm trying to catch myself, my brain ticking, I'm trying to catch myself. But still at the same time telling myself I'm not going to gaslight myself. You know, I know what's going on. I know they saw the stimuli. I'm not going to gaslight myself. I get into the gym. Then I look over to the right, and on the treadmill, I see my old coworker that used to teach with me. And it's not even just like a regular coworker, either like one random face in the school. Not to say like he's somebody special. Like I don't know him on a personal level, but it was literally somebody that taught for the same department as me and that taught the same grade level as me. So him and I were teaching the same grade level, and that's not a big thing. He has every right to be in the gym, and I actually don't think they sent him. Maybe they did, who knows, but I don't think so. That's not a something I suspect. I don't usually go to the gym at that time. I usually go a little bit earlier or a little bit later. So that just might be the time where he goes, and I happen to see him there. So I don't think he was sent there for me, but still seeing him, and my brain was already ticking and going crazy from that moment on the taxi. That just made my brain go haywire. You know, automatically my brain started to crazy. It started going crazy. So I go up to the counter and I'm talking to the owner, and I have my mask on, and I said, good afternoon. And meantime, I'm trying to get my brain to stop ticking while I'm talking to him. And so I said, good afternoon. And I noticed he didn't answer me while I'm filling in the books. I was like, oh my God. I said, don't tell me what happened on the bus is making him not talk to me. And so I was just going to walk off. I was feeling bad. And then he called me. He said, hey, you're not going to say anything? And I said, hey, I did. I said, hey, and you didn't answer me. And he said, oh no, I thought you were saying hi to this person. The person was sitting next behind me, because there's this other guy that's often in the gym, really nice guy, that I also say hi to when I go in there sometimes. But I didn't see him say hi to me. So I was more so talking to the owner, because I had actually walked up to the counter. And so I realized he thought I was saying hi to the guy behind me. And so that's what was going on in that moment. But I actually for a split second thought he wasn't talking to me because of what happened on the bus. So I was about to feel really bad. I was like, oh my God. I was like, this is real bad. I'm gonna have to make a video. I was about to leave the gym and make a video right away. And then he, said whatever. So I just realized it was a misunderstanding. So I go over there and I grab my dumbbells and stuff to start my workout. And meantime, I'm doing the workout, two things pop into my head: the name of that coworker and the name of what was popping in my head on the bus. Those two things popping in my head. I couldn't stop it. It was so embarrassing. I'm like, this is embarrassing. Anytime I see someone I know, I don't even have to have known them personally. I don't even have to have had a personal relationship or relation with them. Once I know their name, it could even be somebody I went to school with that I didn't even work with or anything, that I know the name of. If I see them, the name wants to start popping in my head. And it's so embarrassing because I know my thoughts are being projected. Like typically, if I had seen somebody I know, the name is not going to just keep popping in your head over and over. That's not how that works. But because I know my thoughts are being projected, it's this weird psychological thing that happens where the name now wants to pop in my head. And I'm fearful that that's going to happen because I know they and everyone else can hear my thoughts. And it starts to happen. It's embarrassing, y'all. It's so embarrassing. And so that's what was going on. It was just tick after tick after tick, straight through and through that. Those two names kept popping in my head. And then this Hispanic girl that comes in the gym to work out sometimes, and sometimes she'll tell me hello. I've never really ticked with her before. She's always kind and polite for me, so it's not really a thing. The first time she was in there, her and this other girl that comes in there, I don't know if they were sent in there for me or not. These two I'm not sure about. It's not like that other girl where it was like obvious, blatantly obvious. Because imagine this, y'all. After I did the video, and I talked about that initial Spanish girl I told y'all about when I went on the leg extension machine and she was bending over and the mosquito was flying in my face and stuff. After I made the video talking about it, I never saw that girl in there again. Ever. But those two other Spanish girls, I can't tell if they're really, because they seem to even have a personal trainer. I think they just know about my situation, but I don't know that they're being sent in there for me. I'm not really sure, to be quite real with you. But with them, it's like I only had like one tick when I went in there the first time and I noticed them. Because at that point, I had kind of realized that, or I suspected, let me not bear false witness, that they were sending certain people in there for me. And I knew they had sensitized me to Spanish girls. That's something they're constantly doing with the radio, with videos, etc. because of what I said about that guy from high school. So I'm not sure if those two are that or not, but they're still stimuli regardless. And so my brain ticked the first time that I was in there with them, especially after they spoke to me and they were nice and stuff. For some reason, that just made my brain tick. But after that, I've seen them in there several times. It hasn't really been a problem. Today, boy, everything was making my brain tick. My brain ticked when I saw the coworker. My brain was already ticking before I got in there because of what happened on the bus. And then I see her and my brain is ticking too. The word Spanish kept popping in my head. Spanish. Like, it's just weird, embarrassing stuff, y'all. because of them sensitizing and programming my brain. That never happened before. You know how much times I've been in there with her and so much other Spanish people, and Spanish isn't popping in my head. All of a sudden, Spanish is popping in my head every 5 seconds. I'm like, what is happening? I could not control my brain, y'all. It was embarrassing and humiliating, but I still got through my whole routine. I said, I'm not going to let this thing stop me from living my life, and I'm not going to let it stop me from working out either. I actually got a ride to the gym today. You know, I'm going to work out. I'm going to do my full routine. So despite all the ticking and stuff that was happening, I was like, I'm going to do my routine and I'm going to work out. And I did. I got through my whole routine. And it felt good. I felt good to get through my whole routine. The other thing, you know, anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to go into too much. That's all I want to talk about, really, y'all. I'm not going to go into too much. I'm just grateful they gave me a ride. You know, even when I got to the Vitran station, you know, I was like a minute or two late, and the bus that I would catch to ride home was literally on its way out of that area, and it seemed like he almost stopped there so I could catch him. I was so grateful, man. You don't understand how grateful I was. So it's like they opened up the transportation again for me today, and I'm grateful. So I'm not like trying to... They're revving by now. Y'all hear that? Anyway, I'm sure y'all hear that. Y'all hear that? Y'all hear that? I know y'all hear that, right? As I said that they open up the transportation for me. Remember, you always have a live audience when you're targeted. I know y'all know this, those of y'all that are targeted, so I don't have to tell you that. But that, yeah, they started revving up when I said that. But truly, I am grateful that they opened up the transportation for me again. So it's not like a disrespectful video. It's not a video where I'm complaining or saying anything negative or out the ass. I'm literally just trying to advocate for myself, because not only was what happened to me today embarrassing, even though I know they understand what's going on, it's still just also this fear of mine where it's just like, I feel like because of what happened to me last year, because of what happened to me when I tried to relocate, I have to constantly, I feel like, be on everything and advocate for myself. And so that's what this was. I just wanted to explain what was going on with the brain ticking. And again, too, just documentation and example for you all, so y'all can see what happens when you're targeted and know you're not crazy, and understand that this is just a part of being targeted. And this is just something that happens, a very unpleasant part of the experience. The thought projection and the brain ticks and the humiliation, etc. So don't feel crazy about it and don't feel gaslit about it. It's just something that happens. Anyway, so I just want to talk about it. And I just want to talk about what happened to me today. I bet you this video is 2 hours long. I'd be willing to bet, because I'm pretty sure I started around 4 o'clock. But I said everything I wanted to say, y'all. That's it. I'll talk to you on the next one. Peace out.